Volkov nodded, though her heart was heavy with the loss. We did, but at what cost? The chapter ends with the escape pod drifting through space, the crew scattered and their ship destroyed. They have stopped the new entity, but the price has been high. Captain Volkov knows that their journey is far from over, and that they must find a way to regroup and survive in the aftermath of the Void's final stand. The escape pod floated silently through the vastness of space, a tiny speck against the infinite backdrop of stars. Inside, Captain Mira Volkov and Dr. Elias Kane sat in silence, their expressions heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. The Astraea was gone, destroyed in a desperate attempt to stop the new entity that had threatened to consume them all. The ship they had called home for so long was now nothing more than debris, scattered across the void. Volkov stared out the small viewport, her heart aching with the loss of her crew, her ship, and the countless lives that had been affected by the void. The quiet hum of the escape pod systems was the only sound, a stark contrast to the chaos and noise that had filled the final moments of the Astraea. We did what we had to do, Kane said softly, his voice breaking the silence. If we hadn't acted, that entity would have consumed us all. Volkov nodded slowly, though the pain in her chest didn't lessen. I know, Doctor, but it doesn't make it any easier. Kane sighed, leaning back in his seat. No, it doesn't, but we stopped it. The void is gone, and we're still alive. That has to count for something. Volkov didn't respond immediately. Instead, she continued to gaze out at the stars, her mind racing with thoughts of the crew members who had made it to the other escape pods, of the lives they had saved and the sacrifices they had made. Do we know if anyone else made it? She asked finally, her voice tinged with hope. Kane checked the pod's communication systems, frowning as he scanned for any signals. I'm picking up a few distress beacons from other escape pods. Some of the crew survived, Captain. They're scattered, but they're out there. Volkov allowed herself a small sigh of relief. At least some of her crew had made it. Now, she had to focus on getting them all back together and finding a way home. Can we contact them? She asked, her tone more focused now. Kane nodded. I'm sending out a beacon on all frequencies. It'll let the other pods know we're here and that we're organizing a rendezvous point. We'll start picking them up as soon as possible. Volkov's resolve hardened. They had faced impossible odds and survived, but their journey was far from over. The crew needed her now more than ever, and she was determined to see them all safely home. We'll get through this, she said, more to herself than to Kane. We'll find a way back. The days that followed were a blur of activity, as Volkov and Kane worked tirelessly to locate and retrieve the scattered escape pods. Using the escape pods' limited sensors and communication systems, they managed to establish contact with several other pods, coordinating a rendezvous point in the relative safety of a nearby nebula. One by one, the escape pods began to converge on the rendezvous point, their occupants weary but relieved to see friendly faces. The process was slow and fraught with challenges, navigating through the debris of the Astraea, dealing with the damaged systems of the escape pods, and keeping the crew's morale up in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. As more and more crew members were brought together, Volkov found herself feeling a growing sense of hope. Despite everything they had been through, they were still a team, still fighting to survive. The reunion was bittersweet. There were joyful embraces, relieved smiles, and quiet tears, but there were also empty spaces where friends and comrades should have been. The crew had suffered heavy losses, and the absence of those who had not made it weighed heavily on everyone. Volkov moved through the makeshift camp that had been set up inside one of the larger escape pods, offering words of comfort and encouragement to the crew. They had been through hell, but they were still alive, still together. We're going to find a way out of this, Volkov told them, her voice filled with determination. We've faced the worst, and we've survived. Now we need to focus on getting home. Reyes, who had taken charge of organizing the survivors, approached Volkov with a weary smile. The crew is holding up, Captain, but we're running low on supplies. The escape pods weren't designed for long-term survival, and we're going to need to find a way to replenish our resources soon. Volkov nodded, her mind already working through the problem. We'll start scanning for nearby planets or asteroids that might have what we need. We can't afford to stay in one place for too long. We need to keep moving. Kane joined them, his expression thoughtful. Captain, we might also be able to salvage some resources from the debris field where the Astraea was destroyed. There could be intact systems or supplies that we can recover. Volkov considered this, her heart heavy at the thought of returning to the site of the ship's destruction. But she knew Kane was right. They couldn't afford to leave any potential resources behind. Do it, she said finally. Organize a salvage team and see what you can find. But be careful. There's no telling what might still be out there. Kane nodded and left to gather the necessary personnel, leaving Volkov and Reyes standing in the dimly lit pod. Do you think we'll make it, Captain? Reyes asked quietly, her voice betraying the exhaustion she had been trying so hard to hide. Volkov looked at her, seeing the same doubts and fears that she felt in her own heart. But she knew that she couldn't afford to show weakness now, not when her crew needed her to be strong. We've made it this far, Volkov replied, her voice firm, and we're going to keep going. We'll find a way home, Lieutenant. I promise. Reyes nodded, though her eyes were filled with uncertainty. I trust you, Captain. As Reyes walked away to tend to the crew, Volkov allowed herself a moment to lean against the wall of the pod, the weight of command pressing down on her like never before. They had survived the void, but now they faced a different kind of challenge, one that would test their endurance and their will to survive. But Volkov knew that they had come too far to give up now. They would find a way home, no matter what it took. The salvage mission to the debris field of the Astraea was a somber affair. As the escape pods moved through the twisted remnants of their once mighty ship, the crew worked in silence, their eyes scanning the wreckage for anything that could help them survive. Kane led the mission, his team carefully navigating the dangerous debris, salvaging what they could from the shattered remains of the ship. They managed to recover a few intact supply crates, some functional equipment, and most importantly, a small amount of fuel that would allow the escape pods to continue their journey. As they worked, Kane couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. The Astraea had been more than just a ship. It had been their home, a symbol of their mission, and a place where they had shared countless experiences, both good and bad. Now, all that remained were fragments, drifting through the void. Captain, we've found some supplies, Kane reported over the comms, his voice tinged with melancholy. It's not much, but it should help us get by for a little longer. Good work, Doctor, Volkov replied, her voice steady. Bring it all back. Every little bit helps. As Kane and his team returned to the rendezvous point, the crew quickly set to work distributing the salvage supplies. The fuel was divided among the escape pods, and the equipment was used to make necessary repairs. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going for now. Volkov watched as the crew worked, her heart swelling with pride at their resilience. They had lost so much, but they refused to give up. They were survivors, and they would find a way through this. Captain, we've picked up something on the long-range scanners, Reyes called out, her voice filled with cautious hope. It looks like a planet, an uncharted one, but it's within range. We might be able to find the resources we need there. Volkov's eyes narrowed as she studied the readings on the scanner. The planet was small and appeared to be barren, but it was their best chance at finding the supplies they needed to continue their journey. Set a course for the planet, Volkov ordered. We'll check it out and see if it has what we need. But be on guard. We don't know what we're dealing with. The escape pods adjusted their course, slowly making their way toward the uncharted planet. As they approached, the crew braced themselves for what they might find. They had survived the void, but the dangers of deep space were still very real, and they couldn't afford to let their guard down. The escape pods touched down on the surface of the uncharted planet, their landing gear sinking into the dry, cracked earth. The air was thin and cold, and the landscape stretched out before them like a desolate wasteland, barren, rocky, and devoid of life. Volkov and a team of crew members disembarked from their pods, stepping onto the harsh, unwelcoming terrain. The wind howled across the plains, carrying with it a fine dust that clung to their suits. It's not much to look at, Ray said, her voice muffled by her helmet, but it's better than nothing. Kane scanned the area with his equipment, frowning as he analyzed the data. The atmosphere is thin, but breathable with the right equipment. There are trace elements of water and minerals in the soil. We might be able to extract something useful. Volkov nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. We'll set up a temporary camp and start harvesting whatever we can, but keep an eye out for anything unusual. We don't know what might be out here. The crew set to work, setting up makeshift shelters and beginning the process of extracting resources from the planet's surface. It was slow, difficult work, but they were determined to make the most of what little the planet had to offer. As the hours passed, the crew managed to extract small amounts of water and minerals, which were then processed and stored for later use. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going for a little longer. Volkov watched as the crew worked, her mind filled with a mixture of hope and worry. They were surviving, but just barely. Every day was a struggle, and she knew that they couldn't keep this up forever. "Captain, I'm picking up something on the scanners," Kane said suddenly, his voice filled with confusion. "It's coming from beneath the surface." Volkov's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Doctor?" "I'm not sure," Kane replied, his brow furrowed as he adjusted his equipment. "It's a faint energy signature, similar to the one we detected from the void, but much weaker. It's almost like a remnant." Volkov felt a chill run down her spine. A remnant of the void? Here? Kane nodded slowly. "It's possible. This planet could have been affected by the void at some point in the past, maybe even used as a base or a way station. Whatever it is, it's old, but it's still active." Volkov's mind raced as she considered the implications. The void had been a prison, a trap designed to ensnare those who ventured too close. If this planet had been touched by the void, there was no telling what dangers might still be hidden beneath its surface. "We need to investigate," Volkov said finally, her voice filled with determination. "If there's anything left of the void here, we need to know what it is and how to deal with it." Reyes looked uneasy but nodded. "Understood, Captain. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." Volkov led the team toward the source of the energy signature, her heart pounding in her chest. The landscape grew more rugged as they approached, with jagged rocks jutting out of the ground and deep crevices cutting through the earth. As they neared the source, they came upon a large circular structure partially buried in the ground. It was ancient, its surface weathered and worn by time, but it was unmistakably of the same design as the construct they had encountered in the void. "This is it," Kane said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "This is what's been emitting the energy signature." Volkov approached the structure cautiously, her hand resting on her weapon. The air around it was thick with a sense of unease, as if the very ground was holding its breath. "We need to get inside," Volkov said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "If there's anything left of the void in there, we need to find it and destroy it." The team worked together to pry open the entrance, revealing a dark, narrow passageway that led deep into the earth. The walls were lined with the same strange symbols and markings they had seen before, and the air was thick with the same oppressive energy. As they descended into the structure, the sense of unease grew stronger. The passageway twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the planet until they finally reached a large chamber at the center of the structure. In the center of the chamber was a massive, pulsating core similar to the one they had encountered in the void. But this one was different. It was weaker, flickering with an erratic energy that seemed to be on the verge of collapse. "This is it," Kane said, his voice filled with awe and fear. "This is the last remnant of the void." Volkov's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the core. The air around it was thick with a dark, oppressive energy, and she could feel its pull, tugging at her mind, her thoughts. "We need to destroy it," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "Whatever it takes, we need to make sure the void is gone for good." Kane nodded, though his face was pale with fear. "I'll set up the charges, but we need to move quickly. The core is unstable, and it could collapse at any moment." As Kane worked to set the charges, Volkov and Reyes kept watch, their eyes scanning the chamber for any signs of danger. The oppressive energy continued to build, and the air was filled with a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Finally, Kane finished setting the charges and stepped back, his hands trembling. "It's done, Captain. We need to get out of here before the charges detonate." Volkov nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let's go." The team turned and fled the chamber, racing back through the narrow passageway as the structure began to shake and tremble. The air was filled with the sound of cracking stone and the roar of the collapsing core, and the ground beneath their feet shook with each step. They emerged onto the surface just as the structure collapsed in on itself, sending out a shockwave that rippled through the ground. The core detonated with a deafening roar, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. As the dust settled, Volkov and her team stood in silence, watching as the last remnant of the void was finally destroyed. The oppressive energy that had filled the air was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and quiet. "We did it," Reyes said quietly, her voice filled with relief. "It's finally over." Volkov nodded, though her heart was still heavy with the loss. "We've destroyed the void, but we still have a long way to go. Let's get back to the others." As they made their way back to the escape pods, Volkov couldn't shake the feeling that they were still not out of danger. They had destroyed the void and its remnants, but the challenges ahead were still unknown. But for now, they had won. The void was gone, and they were still alive. And with that thought, Volkov allowed herself a small measure of hope. Back at the camp, the crew was relieved to hear the news of the core's destruction. The oppressive energy that had lingered in the air was gone, replaced by a sense of calm that had been absent for so long. The crew began to relax, their spirits lifting as they realized that the void was truly gone. But Volkov knew that their journey was far from over. They were still lost in uncharted space, with limited resources and no clear path home. The challenges ahead would be difficult, but they had survived so much already. She was determined to see them all safely back to their families, to their lives. "We've come this far," Volkov said, addressing the crew as they gathered around the campfire that night. "And we'll keep going. We've faced the worst that the void could throw at us, and we've survived. Now we need to focus on getting home." The crew nodded, their resolve strengthened by her words. They were tired, but they were not defeated. They had fought and won, and they would continue to fight until they found their way back. As the night wore on and the crew began to rest, Volkov stood alone, staring up at the stars. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but she was no longer afraid. They had faced the darkness and come out the other side. Now it was time to find their way back to the light. The chapter ends with the crew of the Astraea finally free from the influence of the void, but still facing the challenge of finding their way home. Captain Volkov's determination to lead her crew back to safety is unwavering, and the crew's resolve to survive has never been stronger. The journey continues, but they are no longer alone. They have each other, and together they will find their way back to where they belong. The crew of the Astraea, now scattered across a handful of escape pods, had been surviving in the vastness of space for weeks. Their resources were dwindling, and the strain of their ordeal weighed heavily on everyone. But despite everything, Captain Mira Volkov had kept them moving forward, her determination and resolve guiding them through the darkest moments. They had destroyed the void and its remnants, but now they faced the daunting task of finding their way home with limited supplies and damaged equipment. Each day was a struggle, but Volkov refused to give up. They had come too far, endured too much, to let despair claim them now. Volkov was in the command pod, studying the latest scans and data with Lieutenant Samara Reyes and Dr. Elias Kane. The atmosphere was tense, as it had been for weeks, but there was a flicker of hope in their eyes, something they hadn't felt in a long time. "Captain, we've picked up a signal," Kane said suddenly, his voice tinged with excitement. "It's faint, but it's definitely a signal, a beacon of some sort." Volkov's heart skipped a beat. "Where is it coming from?" Kane adjusted the controls, narrowing down the source of the signal. "It's coming from a nearby star system. The signal is weak, but it's consistent. It could be a way station, a relay point, something that could help us." Reyes leaned over the console, her eyes scanning the data. "If it's a beacon, it could lead us to a jump gate, or at the very least, a system with more resources. It might be our best chance to get back on course." Volkov felt a surge of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Set a course for the signal. Let's see where it takes us. The escape pods adjusted their trajectory, moving toward the distant star system. The journey was slow, but the promise of the signal kept the crew's spirits up. For the first time in weeks, there was a real possibility that they might find a way home. As they neared the source of the signal, the crew began to pick up more detailed readings. The signal was coming from an automated beacon, a relic of an ancient civilization that had once used the system as a trade route. The beacon's message was simple, a call for ships to dock and refuel at a nearby station. "It's a jump gate," Kane confirmed, his voice filled with relief. "It's old, but it's still active. If we can reach it, we might be able to find a way back to known space." Volkov allowed herself a small smile. "Then that's where we're going." The escape pods arrived at the star system and found the jump gate exactly where the signal had indicated. It was ancient, its metal surface pitted and scarred by time, but it was still functional. The gate stood like a sentinel in the void, its circular frame glowing with the faint energy that powered its long-dormant systems. The crew worked quickly to dock the escape pods with the jump gate, their hands trembling with anticipation. This was their chance, their way home. But there was still work to be done before they could make the jump. "The gate's systems are operational, but barely," Kane reported as he interfaced with the gate's controls. "We'll need to reroute some of the power from our pods to give it the energy it needs to open a stable jump point." "Do whatever you have to," Volkov said, her voice filled with determination. "We're getting out of here." The crew worked together, pooling their remaining resources to power up the gate. It was a delicate operation, and every minute felt like an eternity as they watched the energy levels slowly rise. Finally, after what felt like hours, the gate began to hum with power. The circular frame crackled with energy, and a shimmering portal began to form in the center of the gate, a gateway to another part of the galaxy, a way back to known space. "It's working," Kane said, his voice filled with awe. "We're ready to make the jump, Captain." Volkov looked around at her crew, seeing the hope and relief in their eyes. They had survived against impossible odds, and now they were on the brink of returning home. "Prepare to jump," Volkov ordered, her voice steady. "Let's go home." The escape pods aligned themselves with the gate, their engines humming as they prepared for the jump. Volkov's heart pounded in her chest as the countdown began. A countdown to freedom, to the end of their nightmare. 3, 2, 1, jump! Volkov commanded. The escape pod surged forward, passing through the shimmering portal of the jump gate. The stars blurred, and the sensation of being pulled through space gripped them all as they hurtled across the galaxy. The jump was ice-orienting, but the promise of what lay on the other side kept their spirits high. When the jump was over, the pods emerged into a new star system, the bright glow of a nearby sun illuminating their way. The comm systems crackled to life as they picked up signals, familiar signals, the chatter of other ships, the beacons of known starports. "We're back," Ray said, her voice filled with relief and disbelief. "We're really back." Volkov felt a wave of emotion wash over her as she realized that they had made it. They were finally back in known space, back in the galaxy they called home. The escape pods were quickly picked up by a passing cargo ship that had responded to their distress signal. The crew of the Astraea was finally safe, their long ordeal over. They were given food, medical care, and the first real rest they had had in weeks. The relief was palpable, and tears of joy and sorrow were shed as they realized they were going to make it home. As the cargo ship transported them to the nearest starport, Volkov and her crew were greeted with cheers and celebrations. News of their survival had spread quickly, and they were hailed as heroes, survivors of an impossible journey, warriors who had faced the unknown and returned to tell the tale. But Volkov knew that the real heroes were the ones who hadn't made it back, the crew members who had given their lives to protect their comrades, to destroy the void. They were the true warriors, and she made sure their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Upon their arrival at the starport, Volkov and her crew were debriefed by officials from the Galactic Alliance. They recounted their harrowing experiences, their battle with the void, and the final destruction of the entity that had nearly consumed them all. The Alliance was shocked by their story, but grateful that they had managed to destroy such a dangerous threat. Volkov was commended for her leadership, and the crew was given the highest honors for their bravery and resilience. But for Volkov, the real reward was knowing that they had survived, that they had made it home. The journey had been long and filled with unimaginable challenges, but they had faced them all together, as a crew, as a family. In the days that followed, the crew of the Astraea was reunited with their families and loved ones. There were tearful embraces, joyful reunions, and moments of quiet reflection as they processed everything they had been through. Volkov found herself standing alone on a balcony overlooking the starport, the stars twinkling above her like distant memories. She had led her crew through the darkest of times, and now they were finally home. But she knew that her journey wasn't over. As she stood there, Reyes approached, a smile on her face. "Captain, they're asking for you down in the main hall. The crew wants to see you." Volkov turned to her, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not sure I'm ready for more celebrations, Lieutenant." Reyes laughed softly. "Neither am I, but I think we've earned it." Volkov nodded, her heart filled with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "You're right. We have." As they walked back inside, Volkov allowed herself to think about the future. The Astraea was gone, but her crew was still together, still strong. And whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. When she entered the main hall, the crew erupted in cheers, their faces filled with admiration and gratitude. Volkov raised her hand to quiet them, her voice steady as she spoke. "We've been through hell and back," she began, her eyes sweeping over the faces of her crew. "But we made it. We survived because we stood together, because we never gave up. I'm proud of each and every one of you, and I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it with the same courage and determination that brought us home." The crew cheered again, and Volkov felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had faced the impossible and won, and now it was time to look to the future, to new missions, new adventures, and new beginnings. As the celebration continued, Volkov found herself looking out at the stars once more. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had forged them into something stronger, something unbreakable. And as she stood there, surrounded by her crew, Volkov knew that they were ready for whatever the universe had in store for them. The final chapter ends with the crew of the Astraea finally home, having defeated the Void and survived their harrowing journey. They are hailed as heroes, but for them, the true victory is the bond they have forged, the strength they have found in each other. As they look to the future, they know that they are ready for whatever comes next, united in their resolve to face the unknown together.